scaling a DTC brand from 0 to 100K a month with meta ads is actually a lot simpler than you think. It all comes down to one particular metric, essentially, which is your natural CAC to contribution margin ratio. What does that mean? Okay. So your natural CAC, basically, if you run ads on Meta and you're spending whatever, $1,000, $2,000 a day, $500 a day, whatever, it doesn't matter. And over time, you decide, you figure out like, oh, wait, I'm normally getting, you know, charged $50 for a customer, for example. That is your CAC, your customer acquisition cost. And your natural CAC is basically there comes to a point where when you're running ads there, even though you're spending more and more money every month or whatever, but your CAC doesn't go up that much. Like if you spend 100% more in acquisition, in actual spend, but you're not spending an extra 100% in the actual CAC, that would be your natural CAC, right? And by natural CAC, it's just basically whatever Meta decides is the market for to acquire a customer for your business, okay, in your category. And then there's a contribution margin. Contribution margin is basically your profit. It's after COGS, after processing fees, after shipping labels, after pick and pack, all that stuff. This is all you have to worry about when you're trying to scale from 0 to $100,000 a month with Meta advertising. Can you make a profit after the natural CAC? After Meta says, hey, it costs you $50 to acquire a customer to scale, okay, can you make 51 on the first day, or $100 after 3 months, or $200 after a year, whatever the number is? Can you make a profit from the CAC that Meta's charging you for? Okay. And the way that we do that is through what I call my day zero strategy. This is based on all the work I've done for years for e-commerce clients in every possible category, even my own brands. Okay. And the reason I call it day zero strategy is because most of your contribution margin happens on day one, on the actual first day that someone sees an ad and then clicks to your site and then decides to buy. That's almost everything is decided on that particular day. You can pretty much guess what customers are going to do on that first day, and then what they're going to do after based on what they're buying. Okay. And the day zero strategy ends up coming down to 5 different elements. One is unit economics, or basically the finances behind your product, everything from how much your product costs in terms of like COGS, all the way to fulfillment. And then there's 2 is your offer. Basically, what are people actually buying? It's not just your product. People are buying more than just your product. 3 is the funnel, or basically the customer journey people are taking to actually buy your stuff. 4 is creative, or the actual ad that people are looking and clicking on Meta. And then 5 is timing, which is usually something not many people talk about, but it's actually extremely important for a lot of brands, pretty much for every e-commerce brand, but for some categories in particular, it's even more important. So going one by one, starting with unit economics, there's your COGS, your cost of goods sold. There's the freight, which is how much you are paying in shipping from your manufacturer to your 3PL. There's the actual shipping label. There's pick and pack fees. There's returns, exchanges, replacements, and then there's processing fees. Okay, all of this needs to be taken into consideration once when you're trying to figure out what is the unit economics of your product. So if you ever hear someone says, "Hey, my offer or my product has 70% margin," a lot of people are only counting COGS into that. No, you need to be counting all of this stuff. If you want to be able to scale with Meta, you basically need to be at 60% or above, ideally 70% or above after all of this, which I know is a little difficult, especially in some categories. If you're in a category like food and beverage, it's going to be very difficult, which is why wholesale is a better channel for food and beverage. But for a lot other categories like perfume, for example, you can get, after all this, you can get 80% margin. So it depends a lot on your categories, and that category you decide to pick will determine how easy and how big you can get with Meta advertising. 2 is your offer. What the offer comes down to your product, the actual thing you're offering, the actual product itself, the price, the payment terms, like either pay upfront 100% like normal, or 3 payments, or some other thing, bonuses, shipping, and your guarantee. Okay, when you promoting stuff through advertising, you're not just promoting the product, you're promoting all this at one time. And because you're promoting all this stuff at the same time when you're promoting your offer, you can manipulate specific parts of this and then actually completely change how people perceive what it is you're actually selling. Have you ever seen like a supplement brand say, hey, you could buy our supplement for $70 or something, but if you subscribe, you can get 30% off? That's an example of an offer. And what you need is an offer that does really well with paid advertising, which is usually going to be something aggressive. It could be like a free bonus. It could be a big discount. It could be like just a cheap product in general that goes into a good back end. So it completely depends on what you're selling, but that is going to be probably the most important part right after unit economics. Yeah. So 3 is your funnel, which is the customer journey. Pre-sale pages, shoppable pages, post-purchase. By this I mean pre-sale pages, think like listicles or advertorials. Then there's shoppable pages like regular landing pages and PDPs. And then there's post-purchase, like if you use something like after sale, you can get like a one-click post-purchase after someone orders your product. And so this is very important and is usually aligned with whatever the offer is. And then 3 is your creative, which is the actual advertising. It comes down to 3 different parts. One is the angle, or like the way you're trying to promote your product. For example, there's a big difference if you are trying to say creatine helps for muscle versus creatine helps for your brain, right? Those are 2 different angles. There's personas like men versus women, seniors versus kids, CrossFitters versus yoga, all the different types of people who would want your product. And then lastly is your format. For example, there's a big difference between a traditional UGC testimonial like you get from a regular person on TikTok, or a street interview where you're going on the street and say, hey, smell my perfume, what do you think? That's another completely different type of format. Okay. And then lastly, it's timing. Timing is a combination of TAM, growth decline, in terms of like, is this a category that's actually growing? Okay. 2 is seasonality based on the time of year. Some products like sunscreen do really well during the summer, but they're not going to sell as much during the winter. That's just the seasonality of the product. And then 3, it's the peak planning. This is basically where like, okay, there's these peaks in the year where we do well and other peaks in the year where we don't do well. What can we do on the times that don't do well? Right. So sunscreen, what do you do during the winter if you sell sunscreen? How can you plan your peaks throughout the year so that you can drive more revenue and do more with meta advertising when normally you wouldn't be able to? Okay, so these are the 5 elements of the day zero strategy. And the reason you do this stuff like this, okay, one is profitability, right? Again, the whole point is you have your natural CAC and your contribution margin ratio. What you want to do is have a higher contribution margin than you do a natural CAC. Basically, if you spend $50, you want to be able to make $51 on the first day, or maybe let's say 30 months from now, you want to make $70 and after spending $50. Okay. 2 is cash flow, especially if you want to be first, if the goal is you're selling a durable product or most things that are not subscription. Cash flow is going to be super important for you, especially when you do like you want to hit first purchase profitability. For most things, you want to hit first purchase profitability, and it's actually there's even an argument for subscription brands. Maybe you should sell bundles on the front end first before you do subscriptions. It completely depends on what you're trying to do, but that is actually super important. And then last but not least is LTV. Usually people overestimate the LTV on their product, which is why being first purchase profitable is important. Uh, but in some categories, like subscriptions, like that's a category where LTV is the main thing. That is the business model. So you might lose something on the front end, which hurts your cash flow and hurts your profitability on the short term, but it makes you a lot more money on the long term. But either way, this is what you're trying to focus on. You're not necessarily trying to do the best meta ads account or anything. You're trying to be profitable with cash flow over a long period of time. That is the goal of advertising. And that is how you actually grow from 0 to 100K a month with meta ads.